Movement and kinetics. Motion, like many other aspects of film, can be literal or highly stylized. Vertical movements, upward motion, seems soaring and free because it conforms to the eye's natural tendency to move upward over a composition. Most of the movement in The Shining is very subtle. Here, as Danny stands, the rocket on his sweater underscores the upward symbolism. He is frightened by the ball that comes from nowhere and would likely want to run away, or in other words, take flight. Downward movements suggest the opposite: grief, death, insignificance, depression, weakness, and so on. Since lateral movements tend to emphasize speed and efficiency, they are often used in action scenes. Movement can also be directed toward or away from the camera. If the character is a villain, walking toward the camera can seem aggressive, hostile, and threatening, for, in effect, he's invading our space. If the character is attractive, movement toward the camera seems friendly, inviting, sometimes seductive. In either case, movement towards the audience is generally strong and assertive, suggesting confidence on the part of the moving character. Movement away from the camera tends to imply opposite meanings. Intensity is decreased, and the character seems to grow remote as he or she withdraws from us. Audiences feel safer when a villain moves away in this manner, for he thereby increases the protective distance between us and him. In some contexts, such movements can seem weak, fearful, and suspicious. Many movies end with a withdrawal of some sort, either of the camera from the location or the characters moving away from the camera. Filmmakers tend to use several different setups and also tend to stage movement diagonally to create a more dynamic trajectory of motion. But The Shining subverts these expectations again and again. There is very little dynamic action. Instead, the actors almost seem to be fixed on a grid. They walk left to right and front and back almost exclusively. And so, when Grady crashes into Jack here, he almost seems to appear from nowhere. In this scene, Danny wants to get a toy from his room, and he's being very careful not to wake his father, who's started to act a little strange. As the camera moves to show that Jack is unable to sleep, it snaps to a 90-degree turn. This reinforces the grid-like movements we've seen, but probably didn't consciously notice. The camera position shifts so that Danny will have to walk a slight diagonal towards his father. But as the camera is on the angle Danny must walk, it's really Jack who's askew from our perspective. As Jack reaches out to Danny, his reflection in the mirror emphasizes the difference in angles. Movement in film is a subtle issue in terms of the area covered on the screen's surface. Although subtle, the human face's movement in close-up can be very dynamic. Part of Jack Nicholson's appeal is his dynamic face. His grin and eyebrows twist in ways that emphasize his expressions. Nicholson previews the dynamic range of his facial expressions earlier in the film. And so this shot is even more unnerving because we know how animated he can be. Later, when he does snap, it's even more startling because he's kept himself more or less subdued up to this point. Epic movies usually depend on longer shots as they are concerned with a sense of sweep and breadth, as they emphasize big events like war. Psychological movies tend to employ closer shots and are concerned with depth and detail, with an emphasis on implications of events on individual people. One stresses action, the other reaction. An epic shot basically means a longer shot and a larger scale. This can heighten the sense of movement overall. Since most of the movie takes place inside the hotel, the exterior shots have a relatively large scale. The storm in The Shining also happens at the same time as the characters reach the point of crisis in the final act. The blowing snow creates a lot of visual action, and the hotel's exterior lights give volume or a sense of space in the shot. The characters' actions also become more intense at the end of the movie. Since the film has a slow build, the leap in tension is very effective. In this scene, Jack is trying to chop his way through the bathroom door where Wendy and Danny have locked themselves in. The camera's movement adds to the violence of the strikes by tracking the axe and abruptly stopping as it hits the door. The Shining plays mostly on psychological tension throughout the film. The subdued movement of the camera and actors seems to represent Jack's own self-control. Metaphorically, Jack is any parent controlling his or her temper. Of course, here it's brought to an extreme. The ending is intense, but it's fitting that the final tone returns to the slower, controlled feel of the rest of the film, as it's the calm after the storm.